Somos escudo y bandera, comité de defensa. Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Vamos a cantarlo. Somos la gente del barrio, un juego de dominó. Somos tradición, esencia, somos mucho más que dos.
Somos quien tiende la mano, el vecino más cercano, los comités de defensa, orgullosamente cubanos.
Comité de defensa,
¡Arriba cubanos!
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta. Somos escudo y bandera, comité de defensa. Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Sentimos orgullo inmenso al defender lo logrado, al desfilar con amor cada 1 de mayo.
Donaciones de sangre, listos a tu llamado, pues somos de patria o muerte, los LR, mi hermano.
Comité de defensa, Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta. Somos escudo y bandera, comité de defensa. Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Dilo, dilo.
¿Viste lo que te dije?
El abrazo del abuelo, un beso tierno de abuela.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Cuba no vale pa'lante, que esto no hay quien lo pare, no.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Sentimos orgullo inmenso de defender lo que somos.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre
Ay,
alerta.
apúrate vecino que esta fiesta va a empezar, tenemos que celebrar.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre
Y
alerta.
cogemos.
Compórtese.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
Allá.
Cuba en revolución sederista, siempre alerta.
En el Congreso seguimos sonando.
Sonando está la
Sabemos lo que queremos, por eso estamos luchando.
estamos de fiesta.
Oye, mira la caldosa que bien quedó. Pero sonando está la orquesta.
Estamos de fiesta.
Vamos cubanos a mover el cuerpo aquí.
Sonando está la orquesta.
Arriba que empezó la fiesta.
Los sederistas estamos de fiesta. Sonando está la orquesta. Los sederistas estamos de fiesta. Sonando está la orquesta. Los sederistas estamos de fiesta.
Guajiro.
Sonando está la orquesta.
Dale que te cogió una bananera.
Los
Vamos.
sederistas estamos de fiesta.
¡Suéltalo, muchachos!
Sonando está la orquesta. Los sederistas estamos de fiesta.
Y es que estamos en Congreso, no te quedes al lado. Súmate.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us from all across the United States, Canada, and around the world as we come together for this important webinar, Trump's Escalating Siege on Cuba, Why We Must Stand Against U.S. Military Threats and War on Cuba. My name is Tamara Hansen, and I'm the coordinator of Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, an organizer with the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition, and author of 5 Decades of the Cuban Revolution, The Challenges of an Unwavering Leadership from Battle of Ideas Press. I would also like to acknowledge that this event is being broadcast from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As we defend Cuba's right to self-determination, I always think that it's important that we take a moment to reflect on the fact that we must also stand for the right for self-determination of Indigenous nations where we are living. This webinar today comes at an extremely urgent time for Cuba. We know that Trump's siege on Cuba is an escalating part of over 65 years of cumulative genocidal blockade on the people of Cuba. And we know that the fact that Cuba has not been able to receive regular shipments of oil and other important goods for running their economy and allowing the humans and beautiful revolutionary people of Cuba to live are having a real impact on the country's ability to provide for its people and the country's ability to thrive. And so as folks living mostly outside of Cuba in North America and around the world, we wanted to come together today to talk and analyze the situation of Trump's recent threats of military invasion or war against Cuba, why we want folks to join the No War on Cuba campaign, and also to talk about what folks have seen recently on the ground in Cuba during this siege as international delegates for the Nuestra America convoy that went recently to Cuba to share solidarity and material aid, as well as for Cuba's amazing International Workers' Day celebration on Primero de Mayo, or May 1st. We're so honored that you decided to join us today and to get hopefully involved in this important work for Cuba. We're really looking forward to 5 great speakers. Again, as I mentioned, many of whom have recently been to Cuba. We'll also have a short time for question and answer and talk about how you can get involved. Today, it is important for you to know that we are not only on Zoom, we are also live streaming on YouTube. Unfortunately, Zoom is blocked for our friends in Cuba, and so they can participate on Zoom. The link has been posted in the chat. And we'd also like to hear from all of you participating from all across North America and around the world. Where are you joining us from? So please post in the chat on YouTube, post in the chat here on Zoom. Let us know where you're from. How did you come to be here? And thank you again so much for joining us. Without further ado, I want to open the webinar today with our featured Cuban speaker, Danny Tour. He is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Cuban Embassy in Ottawa, Canada. He has a bachelor's degree in economics, a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies on Latin America and the Caribbean, and he was previously stationed at the Embassy of Cuba in Mexico. It's a great honor to have Danny here with us today to give us some of the context of the important work that we're engaged in. Bienvenido, Danny. Gracias de estar aquí con nosotros.
Thank you, Tamara, for that introduction. Thanks, and to all the friends of Cuba and the colleagues that are today with us. I really appreciate that all of you have organized this webinar for the possibility of sharing some ideas with you. First, I would like, on behalf of the Cuban Embassy in Canada, to express our deepest appreciation to all those who have shown solidarity with the Cuban people in the present circumstances. Since the beginning of this year, I'm going to speak about Canada. Many organizations, unions, and individuals across the country have supported Cuba through donations of food, medicines, medical supplies, among others. Many people have also signed petitions, writing letters to the authorities, and organized solidarity campaigns, among other initiatives. We deeply appreciate that support. We have feel that there is an overwhelming understanding in the Canadian people that what the US is doing with Cuba is totally wrong, unjust, cruel, immoral, and illegal. No country, no matter how powerful, should have the right to punish an entire people in this way, just for political purposes. The US blockade against Cuba is a form of collective punishment, and it has serious humanitarian consequences. We must remember that this policy is not new. Since the 60s, shortly after the triumph of the revolution, a U.S. government official named Lester Mallory, he wrote in that moment a secret memorandum formulating the objectives of the blockade against Cuba: hunger and desperation in order to overthrow the government. So more than 60 years later, the objectives remain the same. Well, coming to nowadays, earlier this year, the United States announced even more aggressive measures aimed at stopping fuel exports to Cuba. So effectively imposing an oil blockade, which adds to the accumulation of the US blockade effects for more than 60 years, uh, are having huge consequences for Cuba. And this oil blockade qualifies as an act of war under the international law. It's very important to have that in mind. So on May 1st, in a new executive order, the US government reiterated its designation of Cuba as, listen this, as an unusual and extraordinary threat to the US national security and foreign policy, which is of course a blatant lie. For the first time, they has established secondary sanctions. That means that they can sanction any individual or entity or company around the world. So this is not only a criminal attack against Cuba, but against the sovereign rights of any state. So it's an unacceptable act of intimidation against any country and has extraterritorial effects. For example, it's very well known and public knowledge that Canadian companies and airlines, as well as Canadian travelers who used to visit Cuba, are being affected as a result of these new US measures. During these days, we have been listening also that companies from other countries has been affected. So just to take two examples, the impact on the tourism and mining in Cuba is not accidental. On the contrary, it's entirely intentional because they know the importance of these two sectors for our economy. It's also well known that Cuba cannot produce all the oil we need to sustain the life of our people and our economy. We need to import these goods in exercise of an internationally recognized right to freedom of trade and navigation. So when the US government target fuel, it does not merely detain a ship, a supplier, a shipping company, or an insurance firm. It has transportation in Cuba. It affects medical services. It affects health services. It harms the life of millions of people. It harms our children, our elderly, our sick, and it attempts to sow despair in the Cuban people. I would like to go deeper in the humanitarian consequences. Everybody is aware of Cuba's extraordinary achievements in health and education, despite the blockade. In this regard, in Cuba, we pay close attention to indicators such as the infant mortality rate, as it is a very comprehensive indicator that reflects the strength of a whole health system. This indicator reflects the quality of the care provided to the pregnant woman during the 9 months of pregnancy, the time of the baby's birth, and the first year of life of the baby. So it's a very comprehensive indicator. Over the past 10 years, the targets in terms of the intensification of the blockade combined with the pandemic, Cuba went from having one of the best rates in the planet, better even than the US and Canada. We were around 4 deaths per 1,000 live births, and now we are over 9 deaths. Although this indicator is still within the global average, it reflects the rapid deterioration and the consequences for human lives that the blockade has for the Cuban people. And if this indicator is not worse, it's because the quality of the Cuban doctors and nurses. Some people ask how long Cuba will be able to resist this energy blockade or the current conditions. So I think the answer was found on May 1st when more than 500,000 people in Havana and more than 5 million people around the country staged in a conscious demonstration of unity, resistance, and commitment with the revolution. You have surely also noticed the way Cuban families are adapting to these critical circumstances with creativity, innovation, resilience, with this optimistical way of we Cubans have to face the difficulties. So Cuba continues moving forward with its own resources, its educated people, its scientific community. For example, some days ago was announced great advances, great news regarding Cuban vaccines against cancer, for example. And our people remains with this strong sense of national unity. We have a powerful biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries. We have trained doctors who have served around the world. And we continue investing in education and health despite these enormous economic difficulties. We are living in a particularly dangerous time for humanity and especially for Cuba. In this increasing unstable international landscape, the use of force is becoming normalized. We have been watching the genocide against the Palestinian people for many years. And we are also watching these attempts to legalize this fake concept that means peace through strength. The proliferation of unilateral coercive measures, cognitive or unconventional wars, the occupation of territories, the illegal seizure of natural resources, the disregard and violation of the international law, and a brutal application of instruments of dominations that are plugging the war into a multidimensional crisis. The military option against Cuba, I mean the threat of a direct US military aggression, is a real possibility. In a radio interview on January 8th, the US president said, and I quote, "Well, I don't think you can put much more pressure on them than to go in blowing everything up." That were the words of Trump. In other quotes, Trump has mentioned the possibility of located an aircraft carrier near the Cuban coast. And we are watching almost day by day how the Secretary of State is spreading lies without any base against Cuba just to justify this criminal policy against my people. The situation described poses a serious dilemma for the entire international community. We firmly believe that the US measures will only have an effect if the peoples and governments of the world remain in a complicity silence in the face of this crime. The events that we are witnessing today in some way remind us the beginning of the World War II and the rise of the fascism, when the first European countries were invaded and many chose to look to other way. And when they realized they all were occupied by the fascism and they were suffering the consequences of the fascism. To think that the imperialist ambition will end with Cuba, I think, is an act of political naivety. And failing to denounce these US crimes is not an act of political pragmatism, but a cowardice. So there is no justification for an aggression against our country. Cuba threatens no one. On the contrary, Cuba always has provided solidarity. And I can assure you that Cuba is resisting and Cuba will resist because our people believe in their sovereignty, in our dignity, in our own future. And in addition, we know that we are not alone, that we come on a lot of friends around the world as you. So I really appreciate this initiative you have organized today. And everybody, thanks to everybody that is listening to us today. Thank you for all the solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny Tour from the Cuban Embassy in Ottawa, Canada. A great honor to have your analysis and perspective with us on what is happening today between the United States and Cuba, as well as the impact this has on people in Canada and our right to travel to Cuba, and so many other issues that you touched on. So thank you so much, Danny. Looking forward. If folks have questions for Danny, we don't have the Q&A box open at the moment. Oh, there is a Q&A box. You have to click the three dots now on your Zoom functions, and then there's a Q&A box. That just makes sure that we don't miss it if the chat is moving quickly. So if you have any questions for Danny or our other speakers, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will have some time for Q&A later in the program. I am now very excited to introduce our next speaker, Gary Prevost. He is a professor emeritus of political science from the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. Gary is also the co-author of United States-Cuban Relations, A Critical History by Cambria Press, and Politics in Latin America, The Power Game by Oxford University Press. Gary is also a member of the Minnesota-Cuba Committee since its founding in 1990. Welcome to the virtual microphone, Gary.
Good evening. Before I deliver this relatively short and sobering analysis of the crisis that we find ourselves in at this moment, I want to hope that my remarks, together with everything else that is said on this webinar tonight, will inspire people to the realization that this is the most important time to stand with Cuba with whatever tactics and means you find appropriate and necessary. From 1959, in its earliest days, when the radical character of the Cuban Revolution became clear through land reform and other programs, and when Cuba made clear that it was going to pursue an independent foreign policy and that it was no longer going to be a neo-colony of the United States, the rulers of the United States at that point made the decision that by some means the Cuban Revolution had to be defeated. The revolutionary government had to be removed. That has been unchanged over the whole of the 60 plus years of the revolution. But what is different today? What is different today is that the Cuban Revolutionary Project is in its most vulnerable economic position in decades. And there is an administration in Washington that is absolutely convinced to pursue a maximum pressure campaign to reverse the revolution. And we must be clear, they are emboldened by what they achieved in Venezuela in January, where through a military strike and kidnapping of a president, they were able to flip the geopolitical position of Venezuela to that of being an ally of the United States. And in the process, of course, break their economic bonds with the Cuban Revolution in terms of the provisions of oil. I should be clear, the Trump administration's maximum campaign against Cuba comes at a time when, as the manager of the American empire, Donald Trump is facing the decline of the American empire, the result of two disastrous wars in the Middle East that cost trillions of dollars and thousands of American and Middle Eastern lives, a disastrous 2008 Great Recession that weakened the American economy, combined with the relentless rise of China as a global adversary to the United States. This has resulted in this administration, both in its first term and in its second term, reasserting its dominance in the Western Hemisphere, reasserting the centrality of the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the United States can determine the events of the Western Hemisphere and not allow competing ideas and forces to be present there. How has the United States contributed to the economic crisis that Cuba faces? From the beginning of its term in 2017 and continuing with most of the measures through the Biden period and now during the second Trump administration, the programs are targeted. They are aimed very specifically at hitting Cuba where its economy is most vulnerable. That has meant attacking tourism to reduce it, reducing American tourism at the beginning of the first Trump period, ending the cruise ships, for example, coming up with, during the Biden administration, an end of the European travelers' ability to have a travel waiver to come to the United States, and in the process seriously reducing the amount of European tourism in Cuba coming out of the pandemic. The result is that Cuba's tourism revenues have, over the last several years, beginning with COVID, but not exclusively because of COVID, more than cut in half. The administration also targeted Cuba's medical services abroad program. The fact that most in this call know that thousands of Cuban doctors and other medical personnel work abroad in humanitarian missions in some instances, but also as a very important earner of hard currency for Cuba, that went all the way up to 1.7 billion US dollars a year. The US government has systematically gone after those medical service programs, working with friendly governments such as the Bolsonaro government in Brazil, and then in this particular juncture with governments that it can dominate in the Caribbean, to end Cuba's medical missions in many places. Rubio has declared that at the end of their work, there will be no Cuban medical missions in the Western Hemisphere. They've also targeted foreign investment, not just by discouraging new foreign investment, which was done by allowing the Title III of Helms-Burton to go forward during the first Trump administration, which has resulted in lawsuits against foreign companies that do business in Cuba. But even in some ways more devastating, as was mentioned by the Deputy Ambassador on May 1st, a new measure aimed at all foreign companies doing business in Cuba. And it's having its impact. Today, the Melia Hotel Corporation, one of the most important players in the Cuban tourism sector from abroad, is withdrawing from 15 hotels that it is worked on, that it's been in Cuba for decades. And in recent months, as the Deputy Ambassador pointed out, directly going after Cuba's energy sector, knowing that Cuba only produces 40% of the energy that it needs, and knowing that while it is moving towards solar power, that's not something that can be accomplished in months or in a couple of years. They specifically organized the oil blockade. Initially, it was just simply threats to countries that they would be tariffed, but it turned out to be more than that, an actual blockade that was enforced by the American Coast Guard that has allowed only one Russian ship to bring oil to Cuba within the last several months. With this systematic attack on the Cuban economy and the hardship that it has created, the government of Cuba has had no choice but to sit down and negotiate with the United States, which they have always been willing to do. But of course, now they are being forced to do it under very dire circumstances when the revolution is most vulnerable. We do not know the specific demands that the United States government has placed on Cuba. They've hinted at certain things, but we don't know exactly what has been demanded of the Cuban government. But it's my analysis that the demands of the United States government are unlikely to be able to be met by the Cuban government. And that is what brings us to this incredibly dangerous moment. Because when it does become clear to the Trump administration that Cuba is not going to move the way of Venezuela, that the United States has not been able to find its Delcy Rodriguez within the Cuban establishment, at that point, that's the great danger. And in my view, that is why the United States is in the process of preparing military action against the island. We know it through the surveillance planes that are there. We know it through the presence of a U.S. aircraft carrier and other assets that have been moved to the region. And so that's the reason, that's the basis, that's the background from my perspective, why Cuba is right now in the military crosshairs of the United States. Not likely a full-blown invasion, but rather a military action aimed at trying to convince the Cuban leadership to make a deal favorable to the United States. And that's why we in the Solidarity Movement gathered here today know that in the face of that, our tasks are immense.
Thank you so much, Gary. And thank you for bringing those perspectives to us today and going through a very meticulous history of the progression of U.S. attacks on Cuba and how we've gotten to where we are today. And really, I think, emphasizing why we need to take action. I'm going now to our next speaker, which is Renee Quarterman. And big honor to have Renee here with us today. Renee is the founder and leader of Philadelphia for Cuba, a group that she started after visiting the island. As a physician, the focus of her solidarity work is healthcare, while Philadelphia for Cuba promotes support for Cuba in many different ways. Renee uses her experience and professional networks to provide the most specific, problem-focused medical aid possible. The group has provided specialty aid for surgeons, urologists, oncologists, and pulmonologists and family practitioners. She also serves as the lead for the Philadelphia chapter of Not Just Tourists. So welcome to the virtual microphone, Renee.
Thank you, Tamara. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for this opportunity to spend time with you. And again, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel with people who are doing amazing work. I must say, I know that to a large extent, I will be preaching to the choir tonight because the solidarity with and struggle for Cuba have been around since the first US obstruction in 1960. My first trips to Cuba were last year. I knew some of the history and I honestly never thought that I would be able to see the country. So when I got the opportunity, I just jumped at it. And like most of us, I fell in love with Cuba, and it made complete sense to me to fight for the Cuban people against the blockades. I chose to go on the Nuestra America convoy as soon as I heard about it this past February, March. And I knew that it would be an historic weekend. I was excited to be there at the same time as hundreds of people from around the world, all sharing this energy of solidarity with Cuba, with the world watching. There were only 2 members of my organization who went that weekend, and we easily fell in with a larger group. It felt like a week, but it was just a weekend. We just got a lot done. Many of us had our own donations to bring to our friends, so we did that. We listened to lectures, we toured in small groups. We got to know each other and each other's work. Surprisingly, I met quite a few people from Pennsylvania and particularly Philadelphia. So I came back with a larger network where I live, which was unexpected and fantastic. But while there, I just learned from old and new friends that the oil blockade was making life much harder. Folks didn't know where their next meals were coming from because there was no consistent power to cook or to keep food refrigerated. I saw water delivery trucks in the street because there was no power to pump water into people's homes. Trash was piled up on street corners because there wasn't enough fuel for the garbage trucks. There was a blackout while we were there, and the blackout, was the United States insult that I personally really felt. I had food, I had water, I could skip a meal, I could be hungry, I could be thirsty. I could sympathize with those lacks, and I did, and I do. It makes me very sad, but being in the blackout was the time when I felt the closest to how Cubans were living. I was with them in the dark. I was literally powerless, and I felt so vulnerable, and I felt a little humiliated. So those experiences just strengthened my commitment to be in solidarity with the Cuban people and to do what I could to help them. I came back, our group got back to work with events and trying to spread awareness. And then 4 weeks later, more of us went back with the LA Hands Off Cuba Committee. And in just those 4 weeks, there were drastic changes in Havana. First, thanks to the Russian oil tanker, there was electricity, there was some gas. Some of my Cuban friends joked that they would have preferred a few more blackouts during that time just to save some of the oil and make it last longer. There was more trash on more street corners, and then I saw people actually picking through the piles of trash. So clearly, there was just absolutely less of everything. I think within 2 days after we all got home, the blackouts returned. So at this point, my friends are tired. They're frustrated with how everything is now. Their tones feel very hopeless. It's really sad to communicate with them. One friend is frustrated because it's hard to sleep in the heat. He's a physician, and it's even harder to do his job when he isn't well rested, let alone when he knows how to care for people, but he doesn't have the materials to do it. Another friend worries about her elderly mother. She actually got chikungunya last year, and she can't walk because of the knee pain that the infection caused. Mosquito season is returning now, and with an inability to fumigate because there is no gas for the fumigation trucks, and with the trash piling up, I really fear, as I'm sure many Cubans do, about more mosquitoes and more insect-borne illnesses on the way. So my question is, what will that do to Cuba now? How will the pregnant mothers and their unborn babies do in a country where, as Danny just said, infant mortality rate has skyrocketed? How about the more than 100,000 people who are waiting for surgery? What will the lack of water, the lack of food, the real threat of widespread insect-borne infections do to all of them? Those are questions I can't answer, and I'm not sure I can do anything about that. But what I can do is tell more people about Cuba and make sure that more people understand and sympathize and are willing to help when they're called to do so. So in that regard, I thought about things that we're doing in Philadelphia that those in the audience might find helpful to help spread the word, increasing involvement. So if you're trying to figure out what on earth you can do to help the people of Cuba, maybe these ideas will be helpful for you. First of all, I have to say, embarrassingly, I do not know how it works in Canada. But in the United States, you can work with your local government to take official actions through resolutions. So I just checked, and as of this afternoon, there are just under 40 cities and state legislatures in the United States that have officially adopted resolutions to end the blockades and take Cuba off of the state sponsors of terrorism list. So this is a great way to start conversations and find people in your community, including your local government, who've known and cared for years, or who didn't know, but they wanted to learn, and now they will care. Now they do care. We were able to get our Philadelphia City Council to adopt our proposed resolution last week. It was amazing. It felt great. And the meeting room was filled with people who weren't part of our group yet, but who definitely supported the movement. The other thing, another idea, think about the networks that you're in every day and use them. Your colleagues, physicians, nurses, teachers, professors, admin, human resources. Talk to people and sometimes talk at people. I've gotten into the habit now when people ask, oh, how are you? I tell them I'm thinking about Cuba. I'm depressed. I'm stressed. I'm thinking about Cuba. Oh, Renee, what have you been up to? I've been doing work for Cuba. Just got back from Cuba, collecting material aid for Cuba. Just describe what's going on and immediately link it to other suffering that's obvious in the United States and in the world right now. Most people have some aspect of current events that they hate. And chances are they will easily see that what Cuba is going through is wrong, even if they didn't know about it before their conversation with you. So I find that these folks often listen and they ask me questions. And so then when it's time to take action, I have folks who are primed for helping when I need supplies or I need their presence or I need the contact information for people that they know. It's just easier. Also, just changing that mindset, I would hope, creates a ripple effect so that when they can take action independent of me and independent of Philadelphia for Cuba, I can trust that they'll do the right thing. Something that's working here in Philadelphia is our monthly films on Cuba. We have these events, they're free of charge, and people watch the films, they learn, and then we stay for fascinating conversations. There are new people every month. So consider showing a movie with book group members, your neighbors, your faith-based group, your running club, anybody that you share regular interests with. Just sit them down and start the conversation. If you're holding events, consider free admission and ask for material aid instead. So we find that it's easier to give things than money for many people. So we've collected a lot of material aid that has been sent to Cuba in different ways. And I tell folks here, when they wonder what they can do, I say, do not sleep on the dollar store or Dollar General, whatever it is. One member of our group told me about the Buy Nothing website and app. I just discovered it. It's amazing. I'm not sure if it's in Canada, but there's probably something like it. But here in the US on that app, I found school supplies, I found diapers, and people are just giving these things away. Powdered formula. There's just a lot that you can get there. So check that out. And I just find that people are more generous giving materials than they are giving money. The act of giving out of one's own initiative is something that the donor does on her own time, exactly as she wishes. And that freedom, along with awareness and perhaps a love for Cuba, inspires deep generosity. And it is amazing how much we collect when we just don't give anybody any specific parameters. So thinking back to the title of this event, it's a question. Why must we stand against US military threats and war on Cuba? And my answer is because Cuba is us. Every Cuban who is hungry, that is us. Every Cuban who is afraid that the next mosquito bite will ruin their health, that is us. Every Cuban who struggles at a job that doesn't pay them enough to buy what they need, that's us. Every Cuban who was forced to live in the dark without any sign of when their power will come back on, that is us. We must stand against the blockades and the threats of war because Cuba is us. And what can we do about it? We can gather more of us together and stay together. That's the only way that we can affect change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renee, for bringing that eyewitness account of what you saw on your 2 recent trips to Cuba and the impacts of the criminal and unjust and illegal U.S. blockade on Cuba, and the situation of siege that Cuba is in today, as well as your calls to action and suggestions for folks who are maybe have been involved in Cuba Solidarity for many years, or maybe just getting involved, and ideas to take action in your local community. Thank you so much. I'm excited to introduce you to my next speaker. This is Ike Naham. He is an organizer of the International U.S.-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition and of New York, New Jersey Cuba Sea Coalition. He's also a retired Amtrak locomotive engineer and Teamsters union member, and was also recently in Cuba for Primero de Mayo, Cuba's International Workers' Day. A big warm welcome to you to the virtual microphone, Ike.
Thank you so much, Tamara, and thank you to Renee and Gary and Danny for their really strong analysis and description of the impact of the U.S. economic war on Cuba. Listening to Renee just now and describing the conditions, it made me think that what is happening right now and what the Trump and Rubio gang are trying to accomplish is a public lynching in front of the eyes of the world. They want to get away with it with what they're doing in public. And our job is to prevent that from happening and to do everything we can by any means necessary to hit the streets, to mobilize, to be all hands on deck. People that know me know I'm a bit of a military history freak, especially World War II, and listening and witnessing what Renee so eloquently described and what Gary so beautifully analyzed, and Danny, it reminds me of things like the siege of Leningrad during World War II. Where you have the U.S. surrounding and asphyxiating, and then putting pressure on countries not to sell oil to Cuba and that. But this is one side of the question, which is that of the oppression, the cruelty of this blockade, of this economic war. We used to have debates in the movement about whether to call it an embargo or a blockade or whatever. All of those words are now, don't really register the reality. This is an economic war that contains permanent military threat. Right now, U.S. Military forces are, surveillance planes and all these provocations are taking place. Trump and Rubio are trying to create the conditions for what they call in the military euphemisms a kinetic strike. A military strike. Right now, the asphyxiation policy is proceeding. The summer months are coming. The conditions are becoming unbearable. That the United States, as we speak, is moving to activate its counter-revolutionary cells inside Cuba to try to create a false flag and to create the conditions where they can carry out a strike. As Gary said, there's no analogy to what they were able to pull off in Venezuela with what they will face in Cuba. And that's sort of what I want to focus on tonight, because it's not only the repression that we have to look at, but it's also the fight back and the resistance. And that's what I was able to see at May Day. I think Tamara's going to show some pictures of this massive turnout. I've been to probably 20 or 30
May Day celebrations in Cuba, and they're all very inspiring. But one thing that they usually start early in the morning. People line up and get in buses from the suburbs, and they line up, and at 7 o'clock sharp, they start marching. This year, because of fuel limitations and energy, we were among the first groups to go to the Revolutionary Anti-Imperialist Tribunal. There was first a few hundred of us, and I'm saying, well, this will be like a couple of years ago when the lack of energy meant for a smaller but spirited and militant action. But actually, by about 7:30, all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of people started converging on the anti-imperialist square. And as some of these other pictures show, including, it seemed like a mobilization. There's President Raul and longtime comrades Machado marching, and they converged. And before we knew it, there was 100,000, hundreds of thousands of people converging in Havana. That is what Washington will face. Now, I want to just briefly talk about the political and moral context for this confrontation that we face. One is the Iran debacle of Trump that is unfolding before us. The question that we're all debating is whether or not this makes it more likely or less likely in Trump's weakened political conditions that he will carry out a direct military aggression against Cuba. Among the things that he has to worry about is what will be the hemispheric and international consequences of such an attack. We know that right now Cuba is engaged in intense preparation for carrying out their military doctrine, which is called the War of the Entire People. There's no question that Cuba will resist. It is a moral and political resistance, first and foremost, but it also has a military component. And this was shown in May Day, these pictures of so many of the members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces, young, determined men and women that were signaling in their massive turnout that they will fight. There's also, and Danny was an example of it earlier, there's a tremendous diplomatic offensive. We saw some of the pictures of that Cuba is carrying out. So where are we at now? How will they do it? When will they do it? What will they try to do? By land, by sea, by air? We don't know. But we do know that there's not going to be some recreation of this Hollywood movie that they managed to carry out in Venezuela. That's not going to happen. I just want to close by a quote from the great socialist Frederick Engels from years ago, where he said, those that unleash controlled forces, in the case of the intensification of the U.S. blockade and war against Cuba, also set in motion uncontrolled forces. We are the uncontrolled forces. Our movement are the uncontrolled forces. We're the ones that will respond, that will hit the streets, and will do everything to prevent this crime. This is also called the law of unintended consequences. And they're going to have a lot of unintended consequences if they dare to carry out a so-called kinetic military action against Cuba. One last point, we know that when they go to war, they have to accompany it with repression. They're carrying out threats against our movement, our activists, the work that we've done to counter this cruelty. And we have to expect that. We have to be sober about that. And we know that we are going to fight to protect our democratic right to protest this imperialist aggression. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for a wonderful webinar. And I know that this experience is going to bring us all together. The key to our victory is unity. Unity to defend our beloved Cuba. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ike. And thank you for your words and your passion, and again, a bit of an eyewitness account, but also an assessment of where we're at and the work that needs to be done. Our next and final speaker before we go to some announcements and questions and answers is the wonderful Brenda Lopez. She is a young Chicana activist who helped found multiple chapters of U.S. Hands-Off Cuba committees across the U.S. and is now part of the Bay Area Cuban Solidarity Network. Brenda has co-chaired a number of national webinars in recent years and represented the National Solidarity Movement at a tribunal on Cuba in Brussels. Recently, she is working with global health partners to ensure surgical sutures for Cuba. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Welcome to the virtual microphone, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Tamara. It's great to see you again, and so many wonderful folks who continue to make noise for Cuba, especially during these pivotal times, as so many of our comrades have already shared. Yeah, I'll just share. I've been to Cuba 9 times since 2019, and every time I've gone, I see that things continuously get worse. But this last year and this year, within a span of 6 months, I've been able to go 3 times, and each time it's much worse than what it was like within the years that I would go. And so, yeah, I think now more than ever is our time to continue talking about Cuba, continue sharing our experiences, continue linking our experiences locally to what it means to have a good relationships with Cuba. Much as Renee was saying, there's a lot of examples, great examples that we can pull from what Cuba has been doing for a very long time, you know, now almost 70 years since the revolution started. And I can only imagine even more amazing things that the Cuban people would be able to achieve without these continuous sanctions from the US. And yeah, so every time I go, there's a lot of resiliency and strength. Right now, there is a sense of desperation, but that resiliency and strength continues to be very strong in the Cuban people. And as Ike was sharing, we got to witness that on the May 1st demonstration, where thousands of people came together and marched in front of the US embassy to show that Cuba is not alone, Cuba no está sola, and that la patria se defiende, the homeland, it will be defended. And you know, while that gives me hope, it also just reminds me of like the importance of our work, especially in the United States. Like, we're in the belly of the beast. We are dealing with many things that the Cuban people have succeeded in: free education, accessible housing, and food. And so we have to be able to link those things to our own struggle and connect those things to people so they can understand the importance of what it means to have Cuba as an example. Because if Cuba dies, we're only that much further away from so many things that so many of us have been fighting for so long. Like I mentioned, free education, accessible housing, and food. And I will mention that, like, while Cuba is going through a really hard time, I have still seen not even 1% of the fraction of the homelessness people and substance use that I get to witness every day living here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, but also being from Los Angeles, knowing that places like Skid Row exist while the US tries to claim that we're the richest country in the world, also just shows where the priorities of our country are. And so just connecting how, you know, if something were to happen in Cuba, much like it has been happening now in Palestine for almost 4 years, that's our money. That's money that's not being invested in us. That's money that's not going to our hospitals. That's money that's not going to our salaries. That's money that's not going to have accessible housing. That's money that's not going to investments in communities and ensuring that people have nutritious food. I myself live in West Oakland, and it's like a food desert, and you know, and that has racist ties to it. So, you know, there's just so many things that people can connect our struggles with that are happening locally with great achievements that the Cuban Revolution has been able to achieve for its people. And I want to focus a little bit more on what we can do, because there's been people doing Cuba solidarity work for a long time, and even though it's really hard as we face like all these things locally here in the US and it feels very heavy, I think yeah, people are still really coming together to show their solidarity with Cuba. And I was able to put together a bunch of resources and list of already amazing things that are being organized that people can plug into, that people can use to replicate where they live, so that the work doesn't have to seem so heavy and it doesn't have to be like replicated over and over again. I think like when we can work together and have a more unified front, our movements can be stronger, and in that way we can help Cuba, you know, have a, what's the word I'm looking for? Have just more solidarity throughout in the United States but internationally. So I'm going to highlight some of those things that folks have been working on. The NNOC recently launched a campaign called No War on Cuba. And it's a unified week of action that will start on June 28th to July 4th. They have a website, and in it, people can find a toolkit and media kit. And I'm going to mention all of these things, and then I will share a link that has like all of these links listed so that people can just like plug in. There's lots of petitions. Tamara listed 4 of them already in the chat. I'll share them as well, but I just want to highlight one of them, which is the Firmo por Cuba, which is a global campaign that was launched by the Cuban people to collect 1 million signatures. And so definitely want to influence folks to sign on to that. The U.S. Hands Off Cuba committee is already organizing, well, not already, but organized a proposal. So if Cuba does get attacked, which we all hope it does not, the proposal is that if the U.S. attacks Cuba before 1 p.m., we'll rally on the same day at 5 p.m. in any federal buildings, like wherever you're located. And if an attack occurs after 1 p.m., rallies can take place the next day at 5 p.m. We can pass resolutions. Renee mentioned, and I wanted to shout out the Philly folks who literally went to Cuba at the beginning of May, and within that same month, they got back and they pressured the local representatives to pass this resolution. So I just want to shout you guys out. Like, thank you so much for like using that energy. And I guess I'll tie that to like, if you can go to Cuba, there's lots and lots of awesome delegations that go, and you can find delegations for almost like any sector that you're in, whether it be medical, whether it be unions, and whether it be more educational, whether it be queer. The Venceremos Brigade last year had like their first queer brigade. And so I think like just going to Cuba and seeing and experiencing the strength and resiliency I was mentioning, despite these very hard circumstances, will like ignite your fire to come back and like get these resolutions passed, you know, go and demonstrate, go and share with people all the things that you witnessed and you saw and you learned. There's also a lot of fundraisers. If money is something that you have and are willing to donate, I specifically want to highlight Global Health Partners. As Tamara mentioned, this year we've been working on a sutures campaign that has been fairly successful despite all the sanctions and tribulations that the U.S. government tries to put as obstacles. And GHP, Global Health Partners, is actually gearing up for a massive neonatal campaign that will be launching next year. And that's just getting at the heart of what these sanctions have been doing. Cuba has been known for a really long time for having a very low infant mortality rate. And sadly, that has been increasing with these current sanctions. And so Global Health Partners is partnering with MINSAP, which is the Ministry of Health in Cuba, to try to mitigate some of those effects and go to the heart of it and make sure that these Cuban revolutionary babies can come into the world and have the tools that they need to thrive and continue to grow and be part of the beautiful experience that is Cuba. We mentioned connecting struggles. how does this affect us? You know, like connecting it for people, making it very real, making it personal. We can talk about some of the recent achievements, you know, the new medication that they have against Alzheimer's, the new lung cancer vaccine, which is actually their second one, the foot ulcer medication, the list goes on and on. And there's like an awesome documentary by Belly of the Beast that highlights the Alzheimer's one that people can show as movie screenings as a way to educate folks on some of this. And then, yeah, just in general, keep organizing, keep educating, bridge culture with politics, which I feel like for a long time, people try to keep it separate, but Cuba would not be able to have the amazing music and culture and art that it has if it weren't because the revolution prioritizes those things. And so in that way, they're very much connected and we cannot leave them disconnected. Do book readings, movie screenings, report backs, much like this one, car caravans, demonstrations. Get creative with it. The Cubans have a wonderful way of expressing joy despite their hard circumstances. And in that way, we can also learn from them. How can we bring these things up, but also bring it up in a hopeful way where, like I mentioned, Cuba is a beacon of hope and has been for so many of us who are looking for alternative systems. And especially for the young folks, it could be easy to be nihilistic and pessimistic about where our current economic and just general landscape is in the United States. And Cuba is a great example of people who have been doing things differently for a long time, have been punished for it, and continue to do so regardless. And I will end with that. Cuba sí, bloqueo no, hasta la victoria siempre.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brenda, for that great report from your recent trip to Cuba, as well as important information about ideas that folks can take in their local organizing. We have a lot of announcements today because folks are really stepping up their work for Cuba right now in this urgent time. And so I do want to make a couple of announcements before we go into our questions, and then we'll have some more announcements later. And these are kind of what I've called your call for action. Somebody said, oh, why is there no call for actions? Well, your call for actions, there are 4 signatures that we need your support on that are online, not only for you to sign individually, but consider sharing on your social media, sending an email to a friend. These are, again, the international campaign Firmo por Cuba, or Sign for Cuba in English. You can actually print a paper and take it with you to work and ask folks to sign it and send that into the Cuban embassy. They're hoping to collect 1 million signatures for Cuba. There's the Let Cuba Live petition. There is also a petition specifically to the government of Canada and to Mark Carney saying, Canada, defy Trump, sell oil, food, and medicine to Cuba, but it can be signed by anyone inside or outside of Canada, as well as a petition to support Cuba's medical brigades amidst U.S. attacks, which Gary outlined very well in his talk today. We also have some upcoming opportunities for travel to Cuba. And so I'm not going to be able to highlight everything that I know of, but I am going to put a few of them here for you on display as I announce them. Just give me one. Oh, I've lost my file folder. Oh my goodness. Okay. I had a nice folder with all of my beautiful posters for my announcements. Here we go. Okay. So the first that I wanted to announce is that Code Pink is sending many different trips to Cuba this year. Specifically, I've been in touch with the organizer of one that is organizing from Canada to Cuba in October 2026. If folks are interested, they can go to codepink.org/Canada to Cuba with the number to find out more about that opportunity if you're interested in traveling to Cuba in October 2026. The next is the Venceremos Brigade and the National Network on Cuba are organizing a centenary of Fidel Brigade. It is going to be in August 2026. Fidel's 100th birthday will be celebrated in Cuba on August 13th of 2026. There is information there. It does say that applications close on April 15th. I believe they still have space if you're interested to go, but you'll have to reach out to them. So that's one opportunity. Another upcoming opportunity to travel with Cuba is with the Calixto Garcia Brigade. Brenda Cranny, who's been in the chat today, has also already been posting about this brigade. The Calixto Garcia Brigade goes to Eastern Cuba every year. So if you wanted to see kind of the cradle of the Cuban Revolution, to visit Holguin, Bayamo, as well as the Sierra, this is the brigade for you. They're going likely November 29th to December 13th to Eastern Cuba. And if you want to know more, there is a Facebook page as well as email that will be posted in the chat. I am also organizing a trip to Cuba for Fidel's centenary, August 4th to 14th, along with Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, Friends of Cuba Against the U.S. Blockade Vancouver, Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, and the Virginia Defenders. And we do not have a website, but you can get in touch with us through email or phone number. We're going to be going to Cuba for 10 days, hosted by the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples. And we're looking for folks to join us on our delegation. So some folks might wonder if this is the ideal time to travel to Cuba. The answer to that really is yes. The fact is that Cuba needs money to run its economy. It needs folks to go and to spend their money in Cuba. And you've heard today from people who have traveled recently during these difficult times to Cuba. And despite being there in these challenging times, what an amazing experience that they've had. And I really encourage folks to plan travel to Cuba now, to go to be a witness, to come back and share what they saw with their friends, families, and co-organizers, and to really spread the word. We'll come back for some more announcements at the end, but I want to go to some questions. So I have a question here from Morteza, and the question is, the U.S. and its friends are doing their best to starve Cubans into submission, but I'd like to know about the role of culture and consciousness of the people of the revolution's leadership and how it has been cultivated in the people, and in particularly in Che Guevara's writings and speeches on the matter. So I'm going to give this one to Danny to start with, and then if any of our other speakers would like to add, they're welcome to do that. We've got about half an hour for Q&A, and then we'll go to some final announcements and wrap up comments. So again, that's the U.S. and its friends are doing their best to starve Cubans into submission, but I'd like to know about the role of culture and consciousness of the people of that revolution's leadership has cultivated in the people, and in particular, Che Guevara's writings and speeches on this matter. I'll hand it over to you, Danny.
Thank you. Well, as I don't know if I'm going to have the floor again, I would like to express my deepest appreciation and the honor for having this opportunity and share ideas with Gary, Renee, Ike, Brenda, and you. It has been a truly honor to meet people that have such knowledge about Cuba and about Cuba-U.S. relations. It has been a pleasure to hear all of them. Their presentations has been really great. So regarding the question of Morteza, it's good always to keep in mind that Cuba has been facing these economic sanctions for more than 60 years. So, for example, only in the period between 2024 and 2025, in the last report that Cuba delivered to the UN, the damages for the blockade were over $7.5 billion for the Cuban economy. That's a huge impact in only 1 year. So in that framework, one of the main explanations how the Cuban people has been able to deal with such economic difficulties has been the culture and the education that the Cuban people have received during the revolution. I'm not going to do the complete history, but we all know that almost immediately after the triumph of the revolution, we did the huge campaigns for raise the literacy. In Cuba, before the revolution, more than 40% of the people didn't know how to write or read. Everything that all of that changed suddenly with the revolution due to a huge effort of the government, of the people. And even on these difficult circumstances that we have been facing, education and culture are being preserved. So authorities has managed to keep alive the regular courses, the courses of in education, and to keep most as possible all the cultural activities. I remember when I was a student, some time ago, not so long time ago, but some time ago, how we used to study the species of Che. And one of the main topics we used to discuss was the exchanges between Che and Carlos Rafael Rodriguez, that at the beginning of the revolution was one of the main leaders also of the government. They used to discuss how the economy should be managed, and was a period very, very rich in regarding the exchanges and how this new process should be conducted. So it has been very, very important. Of course, always more can be done. There is nothing that is perfect. You always can do more, and you always can do better. But Che Guevara has been a pillar of the Cuban Revolution, and he will remain being a pillar.
Thank you, Danny. Did anyone else want to address this question?
I can share a little bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Cuban revolutionary spirit remains very strong. And when I read the question, the first thing I thought about was on this recent last trip. It was actually when I went with the Nuestra America convoy as well in March. We were just like walking and we saw a doctor who had a white coat, and we stopped him and asked him questions because he had a little flag that was like Colombia and Cuba flag. And so we asked him about it. He's like, oh yeah, I went on one of the brigades, and he was just sharing all this stuff. And then like at one point he's like, oh yeah, like let me tell you guys a little bit about like, you know, about Che. And he just starts reciting Che's last letter to Fidel word for word, the complete thing. And we were just like in awe, like listening to him for almost 5 minutes, just like reciting it all. But beyond that, we as part of the U.S. Council of Cuba delegation, we always meet with the UJC, which is the Union of the Union of the Young Communists, and the Federación de Estudiantes Cubanos, the Federation of students, Cuban students. And just like the passion that they talk about the revolution, despite living in mostly very, very difficult years of the revolution and being young, just also demonstrates how, you know, this spirit is still very much kept alive. And just as much as they understand, you know, their own system, which is socialism, they very much understand the capitalist system and understand that it is not in benefit to them to be part of this system. They see and are educated on like what that actually means, and experiences like us going to Cuba and also kind of mitigating some of that sugarcoatedness that can sometimes happen through, you know, like movies and shit that they see on, oh, excuse my language, and stuff that they see on social media. You know, all these influencers like breaks that reality. And the reality is that most of us won't be able to afford homes, that most of us are in debt for going to school. And so when they also learn all this stuff, they're like, oh yeah, like we don't want that, and they understand that their situation is difficult, but they also very much understand that it's because of years and years of these US sanctions that have just suffocated the economy to a crippling effect.
I could just say something briefly. I think it's very appropriate that Che came up in the remarks of Danny and Brenda, because Che wrote eloquently about this question. You have to start with, and this is what the arrogant colonizers and their mindset will never get. Cuba was a genuine people's revolution. It was not the caricature they tried to of, Fidel and a handful, and they imposed their will. This was a genuine people's revolution, and it put different social classes and the majority of the population in power, and the working class of Cuba in power. Genuine people's revolutions transform human beings, transform consciousness. And that is and Che wrote eloquently about that. And these ideas, at the end of the day, it's the battle of ideas. It's the consciousness of the people. That is the moral factor that creates resistance, that engenders resistance, that consciousness. And in this centenary year of Fidel's birth, we will see that more. It's an experience, and it predates the revolution. It's the whole history going back to Antonio Maceo, Jose Marti, that continuity of consciousness. But real revolutions create the indication of new human beings. They transform human beings into something that's very hard for us to imagine in our dog eat dog. Who can you trick? Who can you exploit? How can you get ahead over other people? It's a different consciousness. And, the battle of ideas is the key. And that is what will help carry Cuba forward in this period, and also inspire people around the world to come to Cuba's aid. Cuba knows that on paper, the United States has overwhelming military capacity. Fidel used to say they could press a button and wipe Cuba off the face of the earth. But what they don't understand is that the Cuban Revolution and that consciousness spreads, that it spreads to the hemisphere, to young people that are inspired like the young people we see coming into our movement in a big way.
I would add, if people want to know kind of more about what Che was thinking about and how he created these societies and systems within Cuba that really fostered the mindset that we're talking about and that we admire so much. Look at, if you can, the work of Helen Yaffe. I just put in the chat the Upstream podcast series. She is currently being featured in several episodes, and she goes into a lot of detail about how Che thought about the moments and how he created these systems and how Cuban society grew out of them. So I think it gives a lot of insight and a lot of appreciation into these descriptions that we're talking about and these observations that we make about Cuban culture and Cuban mindset. And you can rewind it and listen to really understand it. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you, everyone, for your responses. That was great. Our next question is from Anne and is for Renee, but I think I have my own answer, and I hope other people can add as well. It says, can you please recommend a good film to show to a community group that may not know much or anything about Cuba?
So thank you for that. I would highly recommend that you start with Soy Cuba, which was, I think, the first film after the revolution. It was a collaboration between Russian and Cuban filmmakers. Groundbreaking for a lot of reasons. You could approach it from the filmmaking aspect, the acting aspect, but certainly it's a film made up of vignettes that talks about Cuba on the cusp of the revolution. And it opens up opportunities for a lot of conversations. Even though it's in black and white and it's from the 60s, people now can look at these different characters, I think, and pick out what they definitely identify with, because all of the problems are rampant in the United States and around the world. So I would say start with that. It's a long one, so prepare people, maybe have dinner, maybe have some wine with it. But that's the one that I recommend. And I'm happy if you go to phillyforcuba@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, want to know about more films that we've shown, where to get discussion questions to get the ball rolling, I'm happy to help you.
Thank you so much, Renee. I have a few recommendations that I would like to say as well. In terms of documentaries, it really suggests the power of community, how Cuba survived peak oil. It's very relevant. It's specifically about Cuba surviving the special period and a lot of the kind of implementation of various types of alternative fuels that Cuba had to use during the special period in the 90s, and how they basically made a revolution within the revolution very quickly to try to get Cuba's economy off of oil. Very relevant also for the conversations today about solar and all of these other things that are happening again in Cuba, but 30 years later. Also, someone mentioned earlier documentaries from Belly of the Beast. They have the new one, Teresita's Dream, about Cuba's battle against Alzheimer's, as well as episodes 1 to 6 of The War on Cuba. They're all about 15 minutes each, so you can kind of mix and match what you'd like to focus on. And there's also a beautiful documentary about Cuba's literacy campaign called Maestra, which is a short documentary but very powerful about how the Cuban literacy campaign was won, which was mostly through young women, but also young men in the revolution going to rural communities and teaching folks how to read. I will put those all in the chat on Zoom for those who are interested.
Can I add the wonderful award-winning documentary Cuba in Africa, directed by Nagash Abdurrahman, which really in 22 minutes tells the story of the decisive role that Cuba played in winning the independence of, protecting the independence of Angola, winning the independence of Namibia, and defeating the racist apartheid state, which has resulted in the tremendous elevation of Africa in the world. So that's another one to look at. There's so many. And I know Minnesota every year has a Cuban Film Festival. I would recommend that with our growing library of great films, that other cities emulate that. It's a great way to bring people into our movement.
Thank you, Ike. Okay, of course, the wonderful Peggy Gilpin is in the chat, also mentioning Butterflies on the Scaffold, a film that she directed. I have the DVD here somewhere. But it is a film about drag queens in Cuba in the 1990s, but amazingly relevant 30 years later. So again, for those who are interested in organizing something for Pride Month in their community, that's an excellent film. And Peggy is a member of the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition. And as the director of the film, we can usually talk her into giving an introduction or answering some questions at the end. So if you are interested in that, please get in touch with the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition, and we will get you in touch with Peggy. Brenda has also put in the chat Tarea Vida by Helen Yaffe. Again, if you want to be discussing issues around climate justice Tarea Vida is a great documentary that's available for free online that you can also show in your community. Somebody's mentioning books as well. My Brigadista Year by Catherine Paterson. So lots of great ideas. So there you go. Peggy, people are reaching out to you in the chat. Give them your email, or I will give them our email and they can reach out to us and we can make the connection. Thank you so much again for everyone for participating. We do have a few more questions. I don't think we're going to have a chance to get to all of them because we do want to wrap up in about the next 10 or 15 minutes. And I'd like to give all of our speakers a moment for kind of final thoughts. But I'm going to go to the question from Gustavo Rojas, who's joining us from Colombia. He's always at our webinars. Thank you, Gustavo, and our friends in the MCSC for joining us. It says, what do you think the international solidarity movement on Cuba today, including our courageous US and Canadian solidarity brothers and sisters, could do to be more effective to get the US Congress and current US president to realize that lifting the 67-year economic war on the Cuban people and families are important, that they should, there's an English issue here, but further attacking the peaceful and solidarity and beautiful people of Cuba. So I think the question generally is, how do we put more pressure on the current US government to not attack Cuba and to lift the US blockade? Gary, this seems like a question made for you. Would you like to chat about this?
Yes, though to be honest, I think we're quite sanguine about the possibility of using the U.S. Congress to block the president. But there are, because he can veto war power resolutions, and he would have generally veto-proof majorities in the Congress. But we are in the solidarity movement, and more broadly, trying to focus on the two war powers resolutions that have been introduced in the House and the Senate. We're noting that, for example, there have been defections around Iran by several U.S. senators who are opposing Trump's continuation of the war on Iran, and we are in the process of trying to win over some of those Republicans to the same position on Cuba. If they don't believe that war with another country at the moment is the right policy, we are in the process of doing that. We generally have the Democratic coalition in both houses on board, so it actually does become something that solidarity committees rarely do, which is to focus on Republicans, and very narrowly, since we know they are not overall in support of what we do, but may be willing to oppose Trump on starting another war. So that's the effort that's underway from the Cuba Working Group and within the National Network on Cuba.
Thank you, Gary. And just one I've got, again, quite a few announcements to go through, but there has been launched the No War on Cuba campaign, and they are calling on everybody to focus, especially on the week of June 28th to July 4th, which I guess that falls in the 250th celebrations, which have become very controversial in the United States. But I think that's great. Go disrupt some of that activity in a peaceful way. So the No War on Cuba campaign has launched this website. It has the 1,000 signatures for Cuba campaign that we mentioned, Yo Firmo por Cuba. There's also a calendar of local actions, and you can actually add your local event to this calendar or find out about what's happening in your local community. So if folks are interested to learn more about how they can connect with national work happening, please do get involved in the No War on Cuba campaign. So thank you very much to Gary for your answer on that question. So another question for anyone. It says, I heard that the goods brought by the flotilla and convoy to Cuba cannot get distributed outside of Havana due to lack of gas. Are there other ports or boats that can land or other means of transporting goods outside of Havana? Horse, mule, wagon, etc.? Question mark. So I'm going to ask Danny if he wants to answer the beginning of this one, and then if anyone else wants to add.
Thank you. Well, I don't have the details about the donations that were carried out by the convoy, how these donations are being delivered. But for sure, the oil, the gas is an issue, is a challenge. It was mentioned during the webinar. Cuba having received any oil less than one shipment from Russia. That was only the amount was only for 10 days. So anything that we do in Cuba regarding oil or gas is a huge challenge. So probably the donations are these specific donations about the convoy has been distributed in Havana because there is no other ways. But well, I'm not totally sure. We have been receiving a lot of donations from a lot of countries and from a lot of organizations. I can talk about, for example, the donations that we have been receiving from organizations here in Canada. For example, Canadian Network in Cuba has been sending at least one container per month. They have sent containers to Mariel, but also to some provinces. And the oil, the gas is a challenge always to try to solve the issue of the delivery of the donations. Is a great help, a great aid that we have been receiving from these organizations that help to try to solve in the short term all these difficulties that we are having because of the US sanctions. But at the end, the final solution is the lifting of the blockade. Is what the Cuban people needs, that the blockade would be lifted in order for us to have a normal develop, not all these difficult that are not that are a total violation of the rights of the Cubans. So we have the Mariel port. We also have in Santiago, we have several ports, but it's not only if we have ports available, it only depends of the shipping companies. If there are ways to send the containers to some of those provinces to try to make sure the distances. There are some companies, there's some airlines that are still traveling to Cuba. It's a way also to send aid through the airlines. Many people carry with their own luggage aid to deliver in Cuba once they are there. There are a lot of experience about that. So more or less, those are the ways, but everything that would be related with transportation is a huge challenge. That's the reality we are facing today.
Would anyone else like to discuss this or just their experience with the aid on the convoy? All right. Okay, so I think that we will move into our kind of final announcements here. And then I'll give each of our speakers a chance to wrap up. And I'll start with Brenda, who spoke last, and move our way up to Danny, who spoke first. And just, 2-3 minutes if you want to make any final appeals, final calls for folks, or just respond to anything that you've heard today. I'm also posting in the chat for those of you who have some extra money in your pockets and you would like to donate to Cuba. There are many different options for donating to Cuba at this time. Some of those include the Global Health Partners and Saving Lives Suture campaign. Here in Canada, we have Containers for Cuba, as well as the Canadian Network on Cuba, which are both organizations collecting medical aid to send from Canada down to Cuba, as Danny mentioned. We also have other campaigns happening in the United States for solar panels. I don't have that information on me at this particular moment, but these are, if anyone else wants to put campaigns that they're working on in the chat, for Cuba, you're very welcome to do that. I also wanted to, it's been mentioned in the chat and also mentioned by some of our speakers that a few organizations, as well as this No War on Cuba group, have called for folks to basically initiate a call for emergency protests should the United States in any way militarily attack Cuba. And this is something that when I first got involved in solidarity work was leading up to the war in Iraq. And this was something that was widely known throughout my city, that if bombing in Iraq started, we were all going to the US consulate at 7 p.m. that night, and we were going to join in protest. And this was kind of widely known information by everyone in, my university campus, etc., whether they were pro-war, against war. The word got out very solidly at that time. There were posters up all over campus. And I think that this concept is really important for us to be discussing what emergency actions we will take. And so there have been different cities who have announced emergency places and times to go. I believe it's mostly federal buildings at about 6 p.m. But, again, check those calendars. There are also 2 upcoming protests being organized in the U.S. An emergency protest on Saturday, June 6th in Los Angeles. And then in New York, they're going to be having a report back from recent trips to Cuba, also on Saturday, June 6th. And I know there are many other events on that calendar, but I wanted to highlight those because people had posted them in the chat this evening. We also in the chat got information about New York Relief Network. They are having an urgent trip to Cuba, July 29th to August 2nd. And there's a website, nysna.org, where you can get more information about this New York Relief Network trip to Cuba. I hope I'm not missing anything that I plan to announce, but there's so many things for you to get involved in, and I think our message today really is that Cuba needs us right now, and we need to find ways to come together and unite, however that be, whether it be online, out in the streets, through petitions, through other pressure campaigns, and get the word out that human beings of this world are against war on Cuba, and that we are going to stand united against any U.S. threats against Cuba. So I'm going to go to Brenda, and Brenda, if you'd like to give us a few closing comments.
Yeah, sure. Just want to address the anarchists in the chat. Just want to remind folks that despite our end goals or strategies, that at the end of the day, we have a common enemy, and that's US imperialism, capitalism, colonialism, and all that nasty hydra that it is. And so we must take from all the successful revolutions like Cuba, like Rojava, like the Zapatistas, and learn from them, because without examples that we can learn from, we will continue to make the same mistakes. And if we let our very own sectarianisms get in the way, we're only stopping ourselves from having success. And I think that more than anything should be a reason that we learn from Cuba, even if you don't agree with everything. I think there's many things that we can learn from. And then, yeah, I just want to tie it back to the Global Health Partners campaign that I mentioned earlier. We've had a year-long sutures campaign. It will continue throughout the year. And then we're gearing up for this neonatal and maternity campaign that will start next month. And so if folks want to stay updated on that, they can follow us on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook that I'll also post right now, and contribute to those, or just share them with folks. Last year we had a super successful pacemakers campaign where we were able to send over 600 pacemakers. That's 600 lives and hearts that we're able to continue beating. And when I was canvassing out there, at this point I was living in Cleveland, so many people were able to connect to these medical campaigns and fundraisers because they know people who have a pacemaker. They know people or know them themselves that had a surgical procedure where they had to use sutures. You know, we know so many mothers and babies. We were all babies ourselves. And so, you know, like just making those connections as well of the humanity, despite, you know, like the state, but just the humanity of the Cuban people themselves is really important. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone who helped organize this, everyone who continues to do the work and continues to speak for Cuba. I really appreciate the space and being invited to speak here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. All right, I've got Ike.
Thank you. This has been a really excellent webinar, good turnout. It registers how our movement under these conditions is growing. We had our largest protest action in years in New York this past Sunday, at least 250 people, which is quite a lot for us. We had an excellent response from the Penn Station area, which is teeming with people. And I think that's the experience for a lot of cities and a lot of areas. Our challenge is to prepare ourselves to react right now and immediately as we are doing, but also to plan ahead. The next weeks and months will really could be decisive in terms of us moving forward and creating more space for Cuba. Every day that we put off and events and world conditions put off a direct military attack and create more space for Cuba, it gives us more time to prepare our political counterattacks to defeat the blockade. So let's think ahead. We know that, as was pointed out by Tamara during the course of the brigades are going, we should all be thinking about doing July 26th events in our area, especially in light of in the centenary year of Fidel. We know about the August brigades that are going to be going to celebrate that. And in the fall, I would ask people to think about the fall where the United Nations will be opening. You can imagine it's quite a volatile world situation. That's the understatement of the year. It should be very interesting when the UN reconvenes this fall. I know there'll be an important Cuban delegation there. And then, of course, right on the cusp of the midterm elections in the United States, which has a very important importance for what's happening, the crisis within the U.S. government. But also that will be, right before that is likely to be the next UN vote against the Cuban blockade. And we in New York and New Jersey and the Cuba Sea Coalition are planning on, organizing major events around that vote. We're working out the details, but we invite people to come to New York to witness the vote in the gallery. It's quite an experience, and to be prepared. So continuity of struggle, hit the streets, get the word out, tell the truth, and this is the way we're going to defeat this criminal blockade.
Thank you so much, Ike. And someone has asked if this will be on YouTube to share with more people. It is on YouTube already. We'll get the link for you in the chat so you can share out the program from today for anyone who missed it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ike. We've got Renee. Give us your final thoughts.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tamara and Allison, for putting this together. It's been an honor to sit with all of these great panelists. I would say what's been sticking in my mind of the past several days were the words of Kwame Ture. I'm going to kind of paraphrase, but he talked about the difference between mobilizing and organizing. And mobilizing is very important. Very important. The marches, getting people to act on their anger, their fear, getting people out in the streets, adding numbers. But beyond that, the organizing was kind of the long slog of work that actually makes changes to the system. And that's what we are trying to do. And that's what people have been working towards for decades. So just remember that we want to take that energy and we want to take that interest and we want to take that anger and transform it into lasting relationships and unity, so that we can move forward together and support each other when we're tired, when we're discouraged, when we feel like giving up, when we hurt because Trump has done yet another thing that insults our hearts and our souls, in addition to harming Cuba. So that's what I would say, is just really think specifically about what you're doing, what your goals are, and remember that we all need to be together for the long term.
Thank you so much, Renee. I've got Gary.
I think I'll just second the ideas that Renee just put forward, and the importance of, as I said, all forms of resistance. Yes, street demonstrations when that's possible, to make an impact, but also the ongoing work that, especially that we do in the United States in terms of advocacy, the work that's done for material aid in any country. Those are the things we have to continue to do. We don't know the events that are going to unfold between Cuba and the United States in the coming weeks. We have legitimate fears of some very difficult days ahead for Cuba, but we have to simply double down on what we're doing and make clear what our commitments are, and that we stand with Cuba in this difficult time.
Thank you so much, Gary. And I've got Danny, our final closing. Thank you again so much for joining us from the Cuban Embassy in Ottawa, Canada.
My honor. Thanks again for all the speeches, for all the support of the Cuban people. The truth and justice are in our side, and those are very powerful weapons. This battle we are fighting today for Cuba is also a battle for the well-being of the humanity, for the kind of war we want for us, for our children, for our grandsons, for our granddaughters. Are we going to allow that the use of force would be something normal, as we have been watching? Are we going to allow that the occupation of territories, the seizure of natural resources would be something normal? Are we going to allow this disregard and violation of the international law? Is that the war that we want? Of course not. So we need to keep united, very well informed, and fighting for what we consider is the truth, is the justice, not only for Cuba, for everybody. We are talking about human beings, and human beings should be the first thing, should be the most important, not the revenues, the incomes. It's not an issue about the power. It's an issue about the humanity. Thank you all.
Que viva Cuba!
Viva
Abajo
Cuba!
el bloqueo!
Viva! Gracias.
Let's blockade on Cuba. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us this evening. We are going to continue our work for Cuba. We are going to continue mobilizing. We are going to continue showing our solidarity, educating ourselves, educating others as we continue this struggle. Can I get another Viva Cuba?
Viva Cuba, down with the blockade.
Lift the blockade on Cuba. Abajo el bloqueo. Together we are stronger. Let's continue pushing for unity. We hope to see you all at upcoming actions in the streets as well as online. Thank you so much, everybody, and good night. Buenas noches y hasta la pronto. Vamos a vencer.
Gracias, Tamara y Alison.
Great job.